James Simmons, to me, is the greatest Irish poet since W.B. Yeats. But there has been a terrible dearth of interest in his work during his lifetime and even more after it. Edna Longley published a selected Simmons 1956-1986, but sadly managed to evade putting in what to me are Simmons' best poems. And it was only when I began to write to Simmons, having discovered some of his early work. Sadly, Simmons had a stroke a few months later, but he was able to acknowledge that I had picked out some of his early work which he himself valued, but which critics had ignored, and he was deeply, deeply bitter at the way he'd been omitted from anthologies when poets he had known personally, such as Tony Harrison and Michael Longley, had huge features, and I think perhaps in some cases, or not those two, had edited anthologies. And somehow Simmons was missed out. He believed this, and I believe this too, was because Simmons was very much a plain speaker, and he told people what he thought of them. And some of his best poems are poems about other poets, and these were the poems, strangely, that were totally omitted from the selected poems. I think probably one of his best poems was about Seamus Heaney, which he called A Jig for Seamus. I think it's a very funny poem, and I'm sure Seamus Heaney would very much appreciate it. Hear him on the radio, eulogising Sweeney. The king of Rasharkin is our Seamus Heaney, anguished, tormented, blushing with his prize, the tongue of the land itself telling huge lies. Pickled in the Faber bottle, in the Guinness curled, syllables through bog water, bubbles to the world. Lear in a Volkswagen, Hamlet on TV, neither an informer nor an internee. Green life in springtime, winter black weeds, Heaney the chameleon, blue jeans to tweeds. Mind in the winter grass, now the sap flows, body at the fireside, toasting wet toes. Seek him in the boardroom, in the backyard, green shamrock, 3 in 1, damned elusive bard, holding up the art world of Ireland, arms arching, instep on home ground, bogland quaking, Antaeus is beckoning from Mother Island's quim, to Yeats sing Old Lady Gregory and him. I think it's a very funny poem, and I'm sure Seamus Heaney, though we've never met but have occasionally corresponded, would think it as funny as I do. He wrote a series of these poems about other poets, and I think these are all very good. There's one kind of collective poem called Flight of the Earls Now Leaving, which he catalogues briefly the careers of fellow poets who he published in the Honest Ulsterman, and he lectured with, and he knew well. Some, I think 1 or 2 still survive, and perhaps some have died, but I think this is still a very beautiful poem. It's called Flight of the Earls Now Leaving. I hear that Ormsby will be leaving soon. That only leaves me, Longley and Muldoon. Such pillars of establishment we three, New University, Arts Council, BBC. The famous nest of singing birds has flown, across the border or across the foam. Mahon was too fastidious for Belfast. He fled to Dublin, but that didn't last. Onward and upward, the ambitious rogue rests now in London on the staff of Vogue, and Heaney is skulking in some quaint retreat in Wicklow, or at large in Baggot Street, drinking with editors in Dublin bars, far from his students and his seminars. And Leitch, who all things but himself did know, across the water on the radio. He works his way from crisis into crisis, confounding my attacks by winning prizes. Hard-biting Michael Foley at the RC, who edited the HU after me, teaches in London convent schools. The fear of God still cows the pupils. Teaching's easier. John Montague has been away so long. We hardly miss him. Did he once belong? America, then Paris, and now Cork, where the tired muse is henpecked by the stork. God, I forgot one, and I knew I'd do it. The daddy of us all, good old John Hewitt, who left before his reasons being the best, and came back in retirement to unrest. I'm left forlorn to do the Gaelic bit, to hit and run and howl when I am hit, to whine and snivel and lament and moan our right to be exploited by our own, for which so many Irishmen have died, from the post office to the waterside. Bards drive with good success across the border, where all agree the stout's in better order. How can I blame them? How can I defend our Quixotry, who stick it to the end, comparing their good fortune being away with their sad impotence if they should stay? Yet in their going we have lost a host of men that muddled Ulster needed most. Daily there grows about us the sad rout of men that any land could do without. Wee Brian, the leader of the planter stock, who has more faces than the Guildhall clock. Big Ian, who can bluster, joke and rant, ignorantly flattering the ignorant. Wet Liberals, Reform Republicans, old freedom killers and new black and tans. We four still cherish novels, poems and plays. Out sad mad dogs infest public ways. I think these poems are immensely beautifully crafted, and they soar into magic. One of the poets that he knew was Thomas Blackburn, and Thomas Blackburn, the marvellous poet. He was a Gregory Fellow at Leeds when I was still at school, so I never knew him, and but they knew each other well, and this is called Poor Tom. I suppose, when I have the choice, I keep out of his way. The dark suit and commanding voice, glimpsed in the lavatory, swilling gin from the hip, kidding himself, not me. Give the order, abandon ship. Hey, Jim, did anyone see? No, I rather think not. Feel like a drink? Ex-officer material with almost perfect formal salutes. Intensely, personally arguing tactics with colonels or recruits. With him, swanky hotels seem shelters to crouch in. Without intimacy he reveals secrets, blots the escutcheon. Nothing is too small to sweat after, or too sad for his loud, joyless laughter. In spite of the sudden beauty in things he says he doesn't know, we only endure him out of pity, for we know whom we follow, what is imaginary and what real. He strides towards the firing, expecting nevertheless a decent meal, and wine to spill, sensationally boring. Why must exploding air flutter his shoulders everywhere? With evidence of a clear case, we'd court-martial the man for not knowing his place, for subversive doubts. He never can remember what others say, which is insulting. Hello, soldier, he shouts, and one follows his eyes away over one's own shoulder, off to the loo, then with some excuse, for a slug of the old juniper juice. For another view of Thomas Blackburn, I would strongly recommend Julia Blackburn's marvellous book, The Three of Us. He also knew Geoffrey Hill. Before Geoffrey Hill attained the eminence he continued to have for about 60 years. And this is a poem about meeting Geoffrey Hill. There is another account, I think it's by Anthony Thwaite, in an OUP book published a couple of years ago. And I wrote to Anthony Thwaite saying it was the only interesting piece in the book. And this is also another view of of Geoffrey Hill. This is Geoffrey Hill by James Simmons. I must conserve myself, said Geoffrey Hill, and husband nature's riches from expense, submitting to the tyranny of will and not the mob votes of experience. I said, I'm marked by the democracy of every man I meet's demands. I'm loath to step back from the common destiny. I'm a wild flower, you're a hothouse growth. I feel the buffets of the rain, the touch of healing sunlight in the random hours. What dies I drop, what flutters past I clutch. Yes, Geoffrey said, but I don't like wildflowers, although I grant you, death takes wild and tame, festering weeds and lilies smell the same. The funniest poem is not dedicated to a named poet. It's called My Friend the Famous Poet. But I think it's not very difficult to imagine who we meant. His is more a library than a mind. I poke about my own head to find words that I've seen catch fire in friction in a phrase. I prefer well-handled words I can use that have been used on me in crowds and queues. He has to feel the Odeon sell tickets to damned souls, that Dante's hell is in the red plush darkness. Maybe his way is true enough, it's not for me to say. I feel an idiot pointing parallels when nothing in those supernatural hells is half as scary as plain loneliness, cowardice, jealousy. The skill seems frivolous that helps men to avert their eyes from this and that towards hypotheses. Like Faust, he's sold on magic and great whores, and for his satisfaction many doors swing open into nothingness. My life is limited and actual, like man and wife. The thing about Simmons is he never lost his talent. That was from one of his earliest books, Judy Garland and the Cold War. But his very last book, which was called The Company of Children, James Simmons sent it to me to review it, which I believe I did in one of my tiny pamphlet magazines. And I think the best poem in this is a poem he wrote to his daughter from his last marriage to Janice, and it's called Love Leads Me Into Danger. Remind me to take the back road, I said, to my beautiful 7-year-old daughter, who forgot, of course, and I might have driven on. But we found ourselves passing Doorways Bourne, where the chestnuts are the first trees to go rusty, old admirals drowned in their own gold braid. Now you know the feel and luck of a chestnut leaf. I tried to throw a stupid light stick up. How seldom the right weight of implement is around my eagerness. To share could brook no waiting. In the open boot I found an old starting handle. Oh, my grief. Knew it would do the job, and through the iron bar it crashed through foliage, broke down a branch of unripe nuts, fell down and hit the road, and leapt like a dervish, dancing wild and rough. Dangerous metal with an itch for mischief. But it entered a weedy ditch at last, safe enough. On the second throw, it brought down nothing. There was no rattle. It slithered through branches, invisible, and stopped. We waited and looked up. No. Perplexed, I waited longer. But we had far to grow, shrugged and hit the road again, almost home. By the Presbyterian manse, I recognised a tree by pure chance and stopped the car. And all over the road were spotted green spiky shells and scattered shiners. So now my daughter Anna could know all about chestnuts, their groomed horse shine. Later we smelt them, skewering the whole, her with her little pile, I with mine. We threaded strings from pole to pole for hours, absorbedly to conquer fight each other into the night.